His entire future depended on this one meeting, but his screaming baby was publicly destroying his last chance. He was broke, humiliated, and seconds from breaking. Then, a kid from the back of the plane walked up, reached for his daughter, and made an offer that would change everything. Welcome to our channel. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you're ready for what happens next, make sure you hit those like and subscribe buttons so you never miss a story. Now let's get into it. The air in the cabin was a stale, recycled lie, promising comfort at an altitude where human beings were never meant to be. For Caleb Vance, it tasted of failure. His reflection, superimposed over the endless blue canvas outside, was a ghost he didn't recognize, a haunted, hollowed-out version of the man who had boarded this flight from San Francisco with a heart full of desperate hope. His eyes were bloodshot, etched with the fine lines of 1,000 sleepless nights spent coding, planning, and worrying. He was a man running on the dregs of his adrenaline, and the tank was nearly empty. Beside him, strapped into a state-of-the-art infant seat that had cost more than his first car, his 6-month-old daughter Thea, was a ticking time bomb. For the first 2 hours, she had been a perfect sleeping angel, a small, warm weight of peace that allowed him to believe, just for a moment, that he could actually pull this off. That a single father could juggle a baby in a billion-dollar dream. Then the bomb detonated. It started not with a whimper, but with a full-throated, piercing wail that sliced through the cabin's pressurized hum. It was a sound of pure, primal distress, a relentless siren that signaled the complete disintegration of his meticulously planned future. Every scream was a nail in the coffin of Vance Dynamics. Tucked inside the laptop bag at his feet was his life's work. A pitch deck for a revolutionary AI-driven logistics software so advanced it could recalibrate global supply chains in real time. It was brilliant. It was visionary. And it was about to be presented by a man who looked and felt like he was falling apart. He had sunk everything into this one meeting with a cutthroat Wall Street investment firm. His savings, his credit, the last 3 years of his life. Everything. The reaction from the other passengers was a silent, collective judgment. Across the aisle, a man in a tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, let out an exaggerated sigh and dramatically snapped on a pair of noise-canceling headphones. A few rows ahead, a woman with a face tight with disapproval muttered to her companion, just loud enough to be heard, "Some people just shouldn't travel with children." The flight attendant, a young woman named Jessica according to her name tag, offered a smile so strained it looked painful. "Is there anything I can get for you, sir?" she asked, her voice a tightrope of professional courtesy stretched over a chasm of annoyance. "I've tried everything," Caleb stammered, his face hot with a mixture of shame and fury. He had. He'd walked the narrow aisle, bouncing Thea in a rhythm that felt more like a frantic dance of desperation than a soothing motion. Her small body was rigid in his arms, her back arched against him as if he were the source of her pain. He tried a bottle, but she turned her head violently, her tiny fists batting it away, spattering lukewarm formula on his presentation shirt. He tried changing her in the coffin-sized lavatory, an acrobatic feat of misery that left him sweating and Thea screaming even louder. His own panic was a rising tide, cold and suffocating. It blurred the complex lines of code on his laptop screen, turning his elegantly rehearsed pitch into a meaningless jumble of buzzwords. Synergy. Scalability. Disruption. The words mocked him. How could he talk about disrupting global markets when he couldn't even manage the primal chaos erupting in a 2-foot radius around him? He wasn't just a father failing to comfort his own child in public. He was an entrepreneur watching his one and only shot at solvency, at success, at providing a stable life for his daughter, die a slow, screaming death at 35,000 feet. A few rows back, in the cramped confines of economy, Gideon Hayes watched the scene unfold with a familiar, painful ache in his chest. He was a lanky 16-year-old from a tough neighborhood in Detroit, dressed in a gray hoodie and worn-out sneakers. To the casual observer, he was just another kid lost in his phone. But Gideon wasn't scrolling, he was studying. His worn backpack, clutched protectively between his feet, contained his entry for the National STEM Innovators Challenge, a low-cost, portable water filtration system he designed and built himself. This competition wasn't just a science fair. It was his one shot, his only conceivable path to a scholarship that could lift him and his family out of a life defined by limitations. He knew that cry. It wasn't just a sound, it was a language. It was the same helpless, overwhelmed, nerve-shredding wail his baby sister, Chloe, used to unleash for hours on end. It was the sound of colic, of gas, of a tiny, immature nervous system firing on all cylinders with no way to shut down. He watched Caleb's frantic, ineffective attempts with a deep sense of empathy. He saw the judgment being hurled at him like stones, the same casual, dismissive contempt he'd felt his whole life from people who saw his clothes, his neighborhood, his skin color, and decided they knew his entire story. They saw a nuisance, a problem. Gideon saw a man in desperate need of help. But the calculus of offering that help was dangerously complex. He was a black teenager. Caleb was a white man in business class. The optics were terrible. He imagined walking up that aisle, the suspicious stares of the flight attendants, the automatic tightening of purses. He pictured himself approaching the desperate father, a stranger, and offering to take his baby. In the best-case scenario, he'd be dismissed. In the worst, he'd be seen as a threat. The world had taught him to keep his head down, to make himself small, to not invite trouble. Helping was trouble. He tried to focus on his schematics, to tune out the crying and the silent judgment. But he couldn't. He saw the exhaustion etched onto Caleb's face, a mirror of the bone-deep weariness he saw in his own mother after a double shift. He saw the raw panic of a parent pushed beyond their limit. And he felt a hot surge of defiance. The man in the suit with his expensive headphones, the woman with her cruel whispers, they were the problem. Their comfort was more important than another human being's struggle. Their world was built on a foundation of snap judgments and callous indifference. Gideon hesitated, the internal battle raging. He knew that a teenager from his neighborhood approaching a stranger's baby could be seen as a threat. He saw the glares aimed at Caleb, the collective annoyance of a privileged few, and he felt that familiar anger mixed with a new resolve. If you believe snap judgments are toxic and that everyone deserves a little grace, hit that subscribe button. Only trolls who thrive on negativity would ignore it. The thought clarified everything. This wasn't just about a crying baby anymore. It was a choice between fear and compassion, between staying invisible and stepping up. He made his decision. He zipped up his backpack, took a deep, steadying breath, and stood up. Gideon's walk up the aisle was a study in quiet determination. He moved with a grace that seemed out of place in the narrow, cluttered corridor of the airplane, his steps deliberate and sure. He passed the curtain separating economy from the spacious business class cabin, and the flight attendant, Jessica, immediately moved to intercept him. Her smile was a mask of polite inquiry, but her eyes were wary. "Can I help you, son?" she asked, her voice low but firm, a gentle barrier. Gideon didn't stop, but he met her gaze with a disarming directness. "The baby," he said, his voice just as quiet but cutting through the ambient noise. "I think I can help." He didn't wait for permission, continuing past her toward the epicenter of the chaos. He stopped beside Caleb's seat, a calm island in a storm of infant misery. Thea's cries were raw, ragged gasps now, the sounds of a creature pushed beyond endurance. Caleb looked up, his eyes wild with a desperation so complete it was unnerving. He looked like a man on the verge of breaking. "Sir," Gideon said, his voice steady. It wasn't loud, but it had a resonant quality that seemed to vibrate beneath the screaming. "I helped raise my younger siblings. My sister had colic real bad. Can I try something?" There was no negotiation, no hesitation. Caleb, a man who meticulously analyzed every variable in his business, who trusted data over instinct, simply looked at the calm, confident teenager before him and saw a lifeline. He didn't see a kid from the wrong side of the tracks. He saw a potential savior. He gave a single jerky nod, a gesture of total surrender, and began the awkward process of unbuckling Thea. He handed her over. The transfer was a silent prayer whispered into the cacophony. The moment Thea was in Gideon's arms, a subtle shift occurred. He didn't bounce or jiggle her. Instead, he cradled her securely, turning her on her side in a gentle curve that looked practiced and sure. He supported her head with one hand while the other splayed across her tiny back, his fingers finding specific points along her spine. He began to apply a firm, rhythmic pressure, a steady pulse against her rigid body. Then he started to hum. It wasn't a melody Caleb recognized. It was a low, resonant tone, more of a vibration than a song, a deep thrumming sound that seemed to emanate from his chest and travel through his hands into Thea's tiny frame. The effect was instantaneous and deeply unsettling in its swiftness. The screaming didn't just stop, it was as if a switch had been flipped. The high-pitched, frantic wails ceased, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. Thea's body, which had been arched and stiff as a board, went completely limp, melting into the curve of Gideon's hold. Her ragged cries softened into a series of shuddering whimpers, then quiet hiccups, and then nothing. Complete, absolute silence fell over the first-class cabin. It was a quiet so profound it felt louder than the screaming had been. Across the aisle, the man in the tailored suit had lowered his headphones, his mouth slightly agape. The woman who had been muttering about irresponsible parents was staring, her expression a mixture of astonishment and shame. Even Jessica, the flight attendant, stood frozen in the aisle, watching with wide, disbelieving eyes. 200 passengers collectively held their breath, waiting for the inevitable resurgence of the storm. But it never came. Thea's eyes, squeezed shut in agony for hours, fluttered open. They were glassy and unfocused for a moment before they found Gideon's face. She stared up at him, her breathing evening out, her tiny fists uncurling. Within a minute, her eyelids grew heavy, and with a final, soft sigh, she was sound asleep. A deep, peaceful slumber. Gideon held her for another moment, ensuring she was fully settled, before leaning over and gently, expertly, placing her back into Caleb's arms. The warmth and stillness of his daughter felt alien after hours of frantic struggle. Caleb stared down at her perfect, sleeping face, then back up at the teenager who had performed what felt like an act of biblical magic. He opened his mouth to say something. "Thank you, who are you, how did you do that?" But no words came out. His mind was a blank slate, wiped clean by a tidal wave of relief so powerful it was physically debilitating. It felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs and the strength from his limbs. Without another word, without a glance for acknowledgement or praise, Gideon gave a small nod and retreated. He slipped past the still stunned flight attendant, disappeared behind the curtain, and returned to his seat, leaving Caleb alone in a bubble of miraculous quiet. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Caleb could hear the simple hum of the jet engines. He could hear the faint rustle of a magazine page turning. He could hear his own thoughts. He looked down at his daughter, a peaceful angel, and then at the glowing screen of his laptop, where his entire future was still waiting. The adrenaline that had kept him upright for the past 24 hours vanished all at once, leaving a void. The exhaustion, held at bay by sheer panic, hit him with the force of a physical impact. His head felt impossibly heavy. His shoulders slumped, his body sagged into the plush leather of the seat, and before he could even process the miracle that had just occurred, he was instantly and profoundly asleep. A gentle shudder, a subtle shift in the engine's whine, pulled Caleb from the deepest sleep he'd had in years. He surfaced through layers of a disoriented fog, his first coherent thought a jolt of pure, heart-stopping adrenaline. Thea. His eyes snapped open. The cabin lights were dimmed for landing, casting long shadows. For a wild second he couldn't remember where he was. Then he looked down. She was still there, nestled in the curve of his arm, a perfect, still life of slumber. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, even rhythm, her tiny rosebud mouth slightly parted. The miracle had held. The quiet had lasted. He felt a wave of gratitude so immense it was almost painful. He carefully shifted, his gaze sweeping the now stirring cabin until he found him. A few rows back, in the less forgiving confines of economy, sat Gideon Hayes. The teenager wasn't looking around, wasn't basking in the afterglow of his good deed. He was hunched over a worn notebook, a pencil flying across the page, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. He was mapping out what looked to Caleb like a language of angles and forces, lost in a world of his own creation. The kid hadn't done it for thanks or attention. He had done it because he could. The chaos of deplaning was a stark contrast to the peace. The ding of the seatbelt sign was a starting gun for a frantic scramble of bodies and bags. Caleb, juggling his laptop case, a diaper bag, and a still sleeping Thea in her carrier, felt the familiar stress begin to creep back in. He spotted Gideon being swept along in the tide of passengers and pushed his way through the crowd. "Hey!" he called out, his voice a little too loud. Gideon turned, his expression one of mild surprise, as if he'd already forgotten their encounter. I don't know how to thank you," Caleb stammered, feeling clumsy and inadequate. The words felt too small for the magnitude of what Gideon had given him. "You saved me. I mean, you really, really saved me." Gideon offered a small, almost shy shrug, adjusting the strap of his backpack. It was no problem. Glad I could help. And with that, he turned and was absorbed back into the anonymous river of people flowing into the terminal, leaving Caleb standing there, a strange sense of connection and mystery lingering in his wake. The next day, New York City was a roaring, indifferent beast. Caleb stood at the base of a gleaming monolith of glass and steel in Midtown Manhattan, the home of Croft Capital. He felt like a minnow at the foot of a waterfall. But as he walked through the cavernous, marble-floored lobby, the chill in the air didn't intimidate him. It focused him. The deep, restorative sleep on the plane had been more than just rest. It had been a reset. The mental fog had lifted, and in its place was a sharp, crystalline clarity. His pitch wasn't a jumble of memorized lines anymore. It was a story he was ready to tell. He was ushered up to the 48th floor. The elevator ride was a silent, swift descent into the stratosphere of global finance. The boardroom was less an office and more a temple to power. One entire wall was a sheet of glass offering a god's eye view of the city below. A massive mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, dominated the space. Seated around it were 4 people, but Caleb's attention was immediately drawn to the man at its head. Leland Croft was exactly as the legends described him. He was in his late 60s, dressed in a bespoke suit so perfectly tailored it seemed fused to his frame. His silver hair was swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, and his eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a look of profound, predatory boredom. He was a shark who had circled these waters for decades, a man who smelled desperation like blood in the water and whose reputation for eviscerating startups was a point of pride. He didn't offer a handshake or a welcome. He simply gestured to the empty chair with a flick of his wrist. "Vance, you have 30 minutes. Begin." Caleb took a breath, connected his laptop, and the presentation lit up the screen behind him. He started strong, his voice steady and resonant, outlining the market failure his software was designed to correct. The first 10 minutes were a smooth, confident flow. Then Croft cut him off. "I've read your file," he said, his voice like gravel wrapped in silk. He picked up a slim folder from the table, his manicured finger tracing a line down the page. He looked up, a dismissive smirk playing on his lips. "It says here you're a single father. With an infant." He let the words hang in the coffin-like silence of the room. "Bold of you to assume you have the bandwidth for a project of this magnitude." The condescension was thick enough to choke on. It was a calculated blow designed to destabilize him, to remind him of his vulnerability, to put him back in the box of the flustered, failing father on the airplane. It was a test. If you can't stand gatekeepers like Croft who look down on people for their circumstances, comment, prove them wrong below. Let's show the world that ambition has no prerequisites. A day ago the comment would have shattered him. He would have flushed with shame, stammered a defensive reply, and lost all momentum. But the Caleb standing in the boardroom now was not the same man. The sleep, the quiet miracle, the simple, selfless act of a stranger had forged a new kind of armor around him. He met Leland Croft's icy gaze without flinching. He didn't defend or explain. He simply smiled, a small, confident quirk of his lips. "My daughter is the reason I have the bandwidth, Mr. Croft. She's the entire reason this has to work." He turned back to his presentation and clicked to the next slide, a complex data model showing projected efficiency gains. He didn't just present code, he presented a vision. He didn't just talk about algorithms, he talked about revolutionizing how the world moves, making it smarter, faster, and more sustainable. He was passionate, articulate, and in total command of his material. When one of the junior partners threw a complex technical question at him about server load and scalability, he answered it with a real-world application that was both brilliant and elegantly simple, proving he'd thought 10 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. He was no longer just a coder with an idea. He was an architect of the future. When he finished, the silence that followed was different. It wasn't bored or hostile, it was contemplative. Leland Croft's expression was unreadable, his steepled fingers hiding his mouth. "We'll be in touch," he said, a curt dismissal. Caleb packed his laptop, his hands steady. He nodded to the room and walked out, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. As the elevator began its swift descent back to the real world, he felt the immense pressure lift from his shoulders. He had walked into the lion's den, faced the beast, and walked out unscathed. He had survived. but he had no idea if he had one. The air in the grand hall of the New York City Convention Center hummed with a different kind of pressure. It wasn't the recycled chill of an airplane cabin but the electric thrum of ambition and intellect. This was the National STEM Innovators Challenge, a showcase of the brightest young minds in the country, and Gideon Hayes felt like an imposter. He stood beside his display, a simple fold-out table draped in a black cloth, feeling the immense gravity of the moment press down on him. He was an island of homespun ingenuity in an ocean of polished, high-tech extravagance. To his left, a team from a prestigious Palo Alto prep school demonstrated a sleek, autonomous drone with a 3D printed chassis. To his right, a girl from a Boston private academy presented a virtual reality program she had coded to simulate molecular docking, her display featuring 3 widescreen monitors and a professional-grade VR headset. Their presentations were slick, their equipment looked like it had been beamed in from the future, and they spoke with an easy, practiced confidence that came from years of being told they were brilliant. Gideon's project looked almost pitiful by comparison. It was a water filtration system, inspired directly by the recurring boil water advisories in his Detroit neighborhood. The prototype was a clunky, transparent cylinder filled with layers of charcoal, sand, and gravel he'd sourced himself. The casing was a heavy-duty acrylic tube he'd bought with his own money from a hardware store, the valves and fittings sealed with industrial epoxy. It was functional, it was effective, and it looked like something a kid had built in his garage. Because it was. The weight on his shoulders was more than just the pressure to perform. It was the combined hopes of an entire community. He could still feel the warmth of the handshake from Mr. Henderson, the owner of the local barber shop, who had pressed a wad of cash into his hand after passing a hat around for 2 days. He could picture the women from his grandmother's church, selling slices of sweet potato pie after service to raise money for his plane ticket. This wasn't just his dream on the line, it was their investment, their faith made tangible. The thought was both a source of strength and a terrifying burden. He couldn't help but overhear the conversation from the Palo Alto drone team. Dad said if we place in the top 3, he'll introduce us to his contact at SpaceX, one of the boys said, adjusting his blazer. Our budget for the drone was about $5,000, another added casually, not including the software license. $5,000. Gideon had built his entire project for under $60. The chasm between his world and theirs felt impossibly wide, a grand canyon of privilege and access. They were talking about connections and capital. He was just trying to make sure his family had clean water to drink. For a moment, the weight felt crushing. The confidence he'd felt after helping Caleb on the plane began to evaporate under the harsh lights of the convention hall. He was an underdog, a long shot, a charity case. Then it was his turn. A panel of 3 judges, all distinguished academics and industry leaders, stopped at his table. They moved with an air of clinical efficiency, their clipboards a shield against an onslaught of teenage enthusiasm. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, Dr. Eris Thorne, picked up his project overview. She scanned it, her expression unreadable. A gravity-fed filtration system, she noted. She then looked from the paper to the rough-hewn prototype sitting on the table. Her gaze lingered on the thick seams of epoxy and the simple plastic tubing. She looked back at Gideon, her question not unkind, but direct and utterly deflating. Is this all you have? The question hung in the air, a stark spotlight on his limitations. Is this all? No sleek monitor, no 3D printed parts, no custom code. Just this humble handmade object. It was a question that highlighted the vast, unfair chasm between talent and opportunity. The system is rigged against talent from places like Detroit. Hit the like button if you believe opportunity shouldn't depend on your zip code. Only people who want to keep the system broken won't. Gideon felt a flash of the same defiance he'd felt on the airplane. He took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs, and stood a little taller. He would not be defined by what he lacked. He would be defined by what he had created. Yes, ma'am, he said, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the background noise of the hall. It is. Because the genius of this system isn't in what it's made of, it's in what it's not made of. He stepped forward, his earlier nervousness replaced by a quiet, burning passion. That drone costs $5,000 to build. The VR program needs a computer that costs $2,000. They need electricity. They need maintenance from trained technicians. My system costs less than $60. It needs no electricity. It can be built by anyone with basic tools, and it can be maintained with materials you can find in any hardware store or salvage yard in the world. He pointed to the layers inside the cylinder. This isn't just sand and charcoal. It's a precise combination of grain sizes and materials, biochar specifically, that I designed to not only filter out sediment and pathogens like E. coli but also to remove heavy metals like lead, which is the real crisis in my city and dozens of others. I wrote the protocol myself after hundreds of hours of research at the public library. He looked directly at Dr. Thorne, his gaze unwavering. You asked if this is all I have. This is everything someone needs. It's not a hypothetical solution to a future problem. It's a real-world answer to a crisis happening right now. It's designed to be built in a disaster zone, a forgotten neighborhood, or a remote village. It's designed for the people who don't have $5,000 for a drone or a connection at SpaceX. It's designed for everyone else. He finished, his chest heaving slightly, the passion still coursing through him. The judges were silent, their pens still. The dismissive efficiency was gone, replaced by a look of intense, re-evaluative focus. Dr. Thorne looked from Gideon's earnest, intelligent face to the simple, brilliant prototype on the table. She saw it differently now. Not as a crude, handmade object, but as a masterpiece of practical, compassionate engineering. She finally picked up her pen and made a note on her clipboard, a single, decisive checkmark. Caleb was nursing a lukewarm coffee in a generic hotel lobby, trying to quiet the frantic drumbeat of anxiety in his chest, when his phone rang. The caller ID was an unknown Manhattan number. He swiped to answer, his hands slick with sweat. Caleb Vance, he said, his voice coming out as a dry croak. Mr. Vance. This is Anya Sharma from Croft Capital. Her voice was crisp and professional, the same junior partner who had asked the sharpest questions during his pitch. I'm calling on behalf of the partners. We've reviewed your presentation and the internal due diligence. We were exceptionally impressed. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. He held his breath. We'd like to formally extend an offer of a seed investment, she continued. $10 million. The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. $10 million. The number was so immense, so life-altering it didn't feel real. A wave of lightheadedness washed over him, and he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. It was a full body and soul exhale, the release of 3 years of accumulated stress, fear, and soul-crushing uncertainty. He had done it. He had actually done it. Thea's future, once a terrifying question mark, was now a solid, shining certainty. He felt a laugh bubble up, a sound halfway between a sob and a shout of pure joy. That's incredible news, he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you. I'm honored. We're very excited about the potential of Vance Dynamics, Anya said, and for a moment he could hear genuine enthusiasm in her voice. We have the term sheet ready for your review. I'll connect you with Mr. Croft. He wanted to speak with you personally. The line clicked, and then a familiar, gravelly voice oozed through the phone. Vance, Leland Croft here. Congratulations. You've got a hell of an idea. We're going to make a lot of money together. The camaraderie felt false, like a wolf trying on a sheepskin. Mr. Croft, Caleb said, his own voice still buzzing with euphoria. I'm ready to get to work. Excellent, Croft purred, his tone dripping with a faux congeniality that set Caleb's teeth on edge. Anya is sending over the term sheet now. It's all very standard. A few formalities to protect our investment, you understand. Caleb's laptop pinged. The email was there. He opened the attachment, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon, trying to find the key details. He saw the number in bold, $10 million. It was real. Just to walk you through the highlights, Croft continued, his voice a smooth, predatory murmur. We'll be taking an 80% equity stake in the company. Caleb stopped breathing. The celebratory haze in his mind evaporated, replaced by a sudden, arctic chill. He scrolled back up, reading the line again. 80%. He must have misheard. 80%? Caleb repeated, his voice barely a whisper. That seems exceptionally high for a seed round. Croft chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. It's commensurate with the risk, Vance. We're not just investing capital, we're providing our infrastructure, our network. We're making you. And with that, of course, comes control. We'll be taking 2 of the 3 board seats. It's non-negotiable. The reality of the situation crashed down on Caleb with the weight of an anvil. This wasn't a partnership. It wasn't an investment. It was an execution. A hostile takeover disguised as an offer. Croft had seen the desperation on him in that boardroom, had recognized the scent of a man on his last dime, and was now leveraging it to steal his life's work for pennies on the dollar. He wouldn't be a founder or a CEO. He would be a glorified employee in the hollowed-out shell of his own company. He'd have a title, a salary, and absolutely no power. Croft wasn't investing in his vision. He was buying it, gutting it, and preparing to sell it for parts. He imagined the ethical corners that would be cut to maximize profit, the beautiful, efficient system he'd designed being twisted to serve corporate greed. The dream he'd pitched, a smarter, more sustainable world, would be corrupted and he would be powerless to stop it. He would be a puppet and Leland Croft would be pulling the strings. "I'll need some time to review this with my lawyer," Caleb said, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. "Of course," Croft said, his tone making it clear that it was a mere formality. "Take 24 hours. But understand, Vance, this is the only offer on the table. An opportunity like this doesn't come knocking twice. Especially not for someone in your position." The line went dead. Caleb stared at the term sheet glowing on his screen. The $10 million figure that had seemed like salvation just moments ago now looked like the price tag for his soul. The elation, the profound relief, was gone, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. He had walked into the lion's den and survived, only to have the lion follow him home, offering him a gilded cage in exchange for his freedom. The choice was brutal: accept the deal and become a wealthy prisoner, or refuse and walk away with nothing but the crushing weight of his failure. The hotel room was a beige box, utterly devoid of personality. It was a place for transients, for people in between destinations, which felt painfully appropriate. Caleb sat on the edge of the stiff, uninviting bed, the only light in the room emanating from the laptop screen on the small desk. It cast a pale, clinical glow on his face, illuminating the deep lines of conflict etched around his eyes. Across the room in the portable travel crib, Thea slept. Her breathing was a soft, rhythmic whisper, the only sound in the suffocating silence. She was the reason for all of this. Her small, perfect face was a portrait of innocent trust, a silent testament to the future he was trying to build for her. A future that was now being offered to him, gift-wrapped and poisoned. The term sheet on the screen was a deal with the devil, spelled out in the sterile language of corporate law. Clause after clause detailed his own castration. He would be neutered, stripped of authority, his creation handed over to men who saw his vision not as a mission, but as an asset to be stripped and sold. He weighed the two paths and both felt like a free fall. If he signed, the money would cascade into his life, washing away the mountains of debt and the constant, gnawing fear of financial ruin. Thea would have everything: the best schools, healthcare, a life of comfort and security. But he would lose the very thing that made him who he was. He would wake up every morning and go to work for Leland Croft, a well-paid ghost haunting the halls of his own stolen dream. His integrity would be the first down payment. If he refused, he would board a plane back to San Francisco tomorrow with nothing. Less than nothing. He would return to an empty bank account, eviction notices, and the crushing public weight of failure. He would keep his soul, but what good was a soul when you couldn't provide for your child? His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a sharp, intrusive sound that made him jump. A text message from an unknown number. He already knew who it was. "The clock is ticking, Vance. Don't be a fool." The words were a cold slap, a calculated jab from a man who knew he had him pinned. Croft wasn't just offering a deal. He was enjoying the kill. This is the moment where dreams are sold for security. Croft is betting that Caleb will compromise his soul for a paycheck. If you believe integrity is worth more than money, comment, "Stay true" below. People who think selling out is smart won't get it. Caleb stared at the taunting message, then at the glowing contract, then at his sleeping daughter. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful anymore. It was deafening, a roaring vacuum where his future was being decided. With a sharp, sudden movement, he reached over and snapped the laptop shut, plunging the room into near darkness. The final round of the National STEM Innovators Challenge was held in a sleek, modern auditorium, a stark contrast to the sprawling chaos of the main exhibition hall. The air was thick with the kind of silence that precedes a storm. 10 finalists, the best of the best, sat on a stage under the glare of bright, unforgiving lights. Gideon felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had made it this far on grit and ingenuity, but this final stage was a different beast entirely. Dr. Eris Thorne, the lead judge, stepped up to the podium. "Congratulations to our finalists," she began, her voice echoing through the hushed room. "For your final challenge, you will have 90 minutes to design a theoretical system to solve a surprise, real-world logistics crisis." An image flashed onto the massive screen behind her. A satellite map of the Gulf Coast, a monstrous, swirling hurricane churning just offshore. Hurricane Anya, a Category 5 storm, is projected to make landfall in New Orleans in 24 hours, Dr. Thorne explained, her tone grave. "The city's evacuation routes are already gridlocked. Your task is to design a dynamic logistics model to manage the distribution of critical resources, water, medical supplies, and temporary shelter, to the remaining population in the 72 hours following landfall. Your solution must account for infrastructure failure, communication blackouts, and unpredictable population movements. You may begin." A collective gasp went through the finalists. This wasn't a neat, contained problem from a textbook. It was chaos theory made real. Instantly, the 9 other contestants hunched over their provided tablets, fingers flying across the screens. The air filled with the murmur of technical jargon. Algorithmic optimization, geospatial routing, predictive supply chain modeling, drone deployment matrices. They were building elegant, complex, sterile systems of pure data. They were moving dots on a map, treating human beings as variables in a massive, cold equation. Gideon, however, stared at the swirling hurricane, and his mind went somewhere else entirely. He didn't see data points. He saw people. He saw the terror on their faces, the confusion, the primal instinct to survive. And then, his mind drifted back, not to his own project, but to the pressurized cabin of the airplane. He saw Caleb Vance's face, a mask of raw panic and exhaustion. He heard Thea's piercing cries, a sound not of inconvenience but of pure, helpless distress. He remembered how one small human crisis had completely derailed a system, creating waves of anxiety and hostility that rippled through the entire plane. The other finalists were trying to solve the hurricane. Gideon realized that was the wrong problem. You couldn't solve a hurricane. You had to solve the human reaction to it. While his competitors coded intricate routing algorithms, Gideon started sketching on his tablet. He drew flowcharts, but his variables weren't road closures and wind speeds. They were things like panic index, misinformation spread, and community trust score. He remembered how no amount of professional intervention on the plane had worked, but a single quiet act of human empathy had solved the entire problem in minutes. His solution began to take shape. It wasn't just about getting supplies from point A to point B. It was a human-centric model. His system wouldn't just direct trucks to shelters. It would predict which shelters people would actually trust enough to go to, based on their location in established community hubs like churches or schools, not just government-assigned locations. His model for communication didn't rely on cell towers that would inevitably fail. It prioritized establishing a network of trusted community leaders, pastors, barbers, local activists, and empowering them with information and resources. It was a system built not on the flawless logic of machines, but on the flawed, messy, and ultimately predictable patterns of human behavior under extreme stress. When his name was called, he walked to the podium, his heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs. He felt like an outsider, an artist at a mathematician's convention. He began not with data but with a story. "On my flight to New York," he said, his voice clear and confident, "a baby started crying. A single 6-month-old infant. And for 3 hours, a multi-million-dollar aircraft filled with 200 of the most capable people in the world was thrown into chaos. The system failed. The flight attendants, the technology, the protocols, none of it worked. The problem wasn't a lack of resources. It was a failure to understand the core human need." He clicked to his first slide, a simple diagram showing a network of people, not roads. "My competitors have designed brilliant systems for moving boxes. I have designed a system for reaching people." For the next 10 minutes he laid out his philosophy. He explained how his model would use social sentiment analysis from the last known communications to predict where unofficial shelters would pop up. He detailed a resource allocation system that prioritized adaptability over rigid efficiency, allowing local leaders on the ground to redirect supplies based on real-time human needs, not a pre-programmed route. He was confident, passionate, and utterly convincing. He ended by looking directly at the judges, his gaze unwavering. We are taught that the most advanced solution is the most complex one. But I believe the most advanced solution is the most human one. Because in a crisis, the most elegant algorithm in the world is useless if it doesn't solve a human need. He finished, and a profound silence filled the auditorium. The judges stared at him, their expressions a mixture of surprise and deep, intellectual respect. They had been watching a series of brilliant programmers. They had just listened to a visionary. The announcement of the winner felt like a formality. When Dr. Thorne called his name, the applause was thunderous. As he walked off the stage, clutching the oversized check and the championship trophy, one of the finalists he'd beaten, the boy from the Palo Alto drone team, walked past him with a dismissive sneer. "Congratulations," the boy scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. Guess the judges fell for the sentimental speech. He represented a system that prizes cold data over human impact, a world where people are just numbers on a spreadsheet. Subscribe if you believe technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. Only bots and corporate drones will disagree. Gideon watched him walk away, the insults sliding off him. He looked at the trophy in his hands not as a prize, but as a validation. He hadn't just won a competition. He had proven that his perspective, born from empathy and experience, wasn't a weakness, it was a superpower. The 24-hour deadline was a countdown timer to the execution of his dream. Caleb paced the length of his hotel room, a caged animal in a beige prison. Every path he mapped in his mind led to a dead end. Sign the deal and lose his soul. Refuse the deal and lose everything else. He was trapped, and Leland Croft knew it. He collapsed onto the bed, the silence of the room amplifying the frantic noise in his head. He pulled out his phone, scrolling aimlessly through a news feed, a desperate act of mental evasion. He was just swiping past headlines, politics, sports, celebrity gossip, when a photo snagged his attention. It was a picture of a lanky teenager holding an oversized check and a trophy, a grin of pure, unadulterated triumph on his face. The headline read, "Detroit Teen's Human-Centric Design Wins National STEM Innovators Challenge." It was Gideon. Caleb sat bolt upright, his heart suddenly pounding a different rhythm. He read the article, his eyes devouring the words. It described Gideon's final challenge, solving a logistics crisis. It quoted his winning speech, "The most elegant algorithm in the world is useless if it doesn't solve a human need." The words hit Caleb like a lightning strike. Integrity. Empathy. A human-centric solution. Gideon hadn't compromised. He hadn't bent his vision to fit the judge's expectations. He had presented his truth, his philosophy, and he had won. He hadn't sold out. He had doubled down on who he was. In that moment, Gideon's victory became a mirror, reflecting Caleb's own impending surrender with brutal clarity. He was about to let a man like Croft, a man who saw human beings as decimal points on a balance sheet, dictate the future of a technology built on a foundation of human-centric design. The hypocrisy was sickening. A decision, sharp and terrifying, crystallized in his mind. He would not sign. He would not be a fool, but he would not be a puppet either. He remembered the meeting. He remembered the dismissive way Croft had cut off the junior partner, the only other person in the room whose eyes had lit up when he spoke about his vision. Anya Sharma. Her questions hadn't been about profit margins. They had been about application, about potential, about the why behind the what. She had seen it. A desperate, insane gambit began to form in his mind. It was a 1-in-a-million shot, but it was better than the slow-motion suicide Croft was offering. He grabbed his laptop and started digging. He found Anya Sharma's professional profile online, a rising star in the VC world, but always in Croft's shadow. There was no direct email, no phone number. But there was a link to a recent tech panel she had spoken on. He found the video, and in the closing credits, a contact email for follow-up questions. It was a long shot. His fingers flew across the keyboard. The subject line was simple, Vance Dynamics. The message was even simpler. Ms. Sharma, I am formally rejecting Mr. Croft's offer. I believe Croft Capital is making a mistake by letting my company go. Give me 5 minutes of your time tomorrow morning before I fly home. That's all I ask. Caleb Vance. He hit send, his heart hammering. It was a Hail Mary pass into the digital void. He expected silence. Minutes later, his phone buzzed. It was an email. My office. 8 a.m. Don't be late. The next morning, Caleb was shown not to the main boardroom, but to a smaller, corner office with a stunning view of Central Park. Anya Sharma's space was modern and minimalist, a sharp contrast to Croft's opulent, mahogany and leather tomb. She stood as he entered, professional and direct. "Mr. Vance," she said, gesturing to a chair. "You have my curiosity." And 5 minutes. Caleb didn't sit. He didn't have time for pleasantries. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm here because Leland Croft is about to make a terrible decision, and I think you know it." He laid it all out, his voice low and intense. He told her about the offer. 80% equity, total board control. He didn't whine or complain. He stated it as a fact, a diagnosis of a sickness. "He's not investing in my vision," Caleb said, his gaze locked with hers. "He's buying my company to strip it for parts. He'll replace my ethical framework with a profit-at-all-costs model, and in 2 years he'll sell the empty shell to the highest bidder. You saw the potential in that room. You know this technology can change the world. He's going to kill it." He took a step closer, his voice dropping further. "I didn't spend 3 years of my life, risk everything I have, to build a tool for corporate vultures. I built it to create a better, more efficient, more humane system. I'm not just pitching you a piece of software, Miss Sharma. I'm pitching you my integrity. I'm not looking for a boss. I am looking for a partner." He finished, the words hanging in the sunlit air between them. Anya was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She walked to her office door and quietly closed it. When she turned back, the professional mask was gone, replaced by a look of sharp, calculated intensity. "Let me tell you something about Leland Croft," she said, her voice a low, controlled burn. "He's a relic. He built his empire in an era of hostile takeovers and corporate raiding. He can't see a brilliant idea without wanting to own it, control it, and bleed it dry. He thinks talent only comes from Stanford with a silver spoon in its mouth." She walked to her window, looking out over the park. "I have been waiting for an opportunity. A founder with a backbone. A technology that's more than just a get-rich-quick scheme." She turned back to face him, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "I have my own discretionary fund. A smaller, more agile fund that Croft can't touch. It's designed for exactly this kind of situation." She leaned against her desk, her arms crossed. "I can't offer you 10 million. 10 million is what he uses to gut a company. But I can offer you 5 million. 5 million is what I used to build one." Caleb stared at her, his mind struggling to keep up. 5 million, she continued, her voice now sharp as steel. "In exchange for a 30% stake. You keep 70%. You keep 2 of the 3 board seats. You keep control of your company, your vision, and your soul. It's half the money, but it's a real partnership." The air left Caleb's lungs in a rush. A dizzying, incredulous joy washed over him, so potent it felt like he could float right out of his chair. It was a lifeline he hadn't even dared to dream of. It was everything. He met her gaze, and for the first time in days, he felt the solid ground beneath his feet. "When can we start?" he asked, a wide, unstoppable grin spreading across his face. A few weeks later, the chaos of New York had been replaced by the quiet hum of a new beginning. Caleb's office wasn't on the 48th floor of a glass tower. It was a modest, rented space in a San Francisco co-working building that smelled of fresh paint and ambition. A large whiteboard was covered in a chaotic symphony of code and flowcharts. In a sunlit corner, Thea babbled happily in a playpen, a small, cheerful anchor in his new world. On his monitor, a video call was open. On the other end, beaming from a simple bedroom in Detroit, was Gideon Hayes. He was holding a piece of paper up to the camera, his smile a mix of disbelief and a quiet, life-altering joy. The letterhead was unmistakable. California Institute of Technology. "I saw the news," Caleb said, his own grin wide and genuine. "But seeing that letter, congratulations, Gideon. Truly. You earned every bit of it." "Thanks, Mr. Vance," Gideon replied, his eyes shining. "It still doesn't feel real." "Call me Caleb," he insisted, leaning forward. His voice grew quieter, thick with an emotion he hadn't fully processed yet. "Listen, I need you to understand something. I wouldn't be sitting in this office right now if it weren't for you. That sleep I got on the plane, it was everything. You didn't just calm down my daughter, you gave me the clarity I needed to fight." Gideon looked down for a moment, a humble shrug rippling through his shoulders. I think we helped each other, he said. Caleb smiled, a deep sense of respect solidifying in his chest. You're right. Which is why this isn't the end of our story. I want to make you an offer. He took a breath. The first part of my funding is being used to launch the Vance Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to funding and mentoring promising STEM students from underserved communities. Kids like you. I want you to be its first honorary board member. Gideon's eyes went wide, but Caleb held up a hand. That's just the start. When you graduate from Caltech, and you will do incredible things there, there's a job waiting for you here at Vance Dynamics. I want you to be the head of my research and development department. He paused, letting the weight of the offer sink in before correcting himself. No, not a job. A partnership. Gideon was speechless, the acceptance letter held forgotten in his hand as the full scope of his future suddenly snapped into focus. Caleb and Gideon beat a system designed to keep them down, personified by the greed of men like Leland Croft. Their story is a testament to the power of kindness and integrity in a world that often rewards the opposite. If you're tired of the Crofts of the world winning, subscribe, like, and share this story. Let's make sure stories of real character and triumph are the ones that get heard. Caleb looked at the screen, at the brilliant young man whose simple act of compassion had changed everything. 2 windows on a single screen, a tech mogul and a teen prodigy, their ascent just beginning.